Hey, it's Scotty from Xenium Real Wealth. This webinar this evening is our August 2019 special guest webinar, and our guest for this evening is Rachael Hambling. She's a development site acquisition specialist. God, that's a mouthful. So Rachael is going to talk to us about development sites, finding development sites, what she does to find development sites. She's going to give us some of her top tools that she uses. They're online tools that help her decide very quickly whether a development site is any good to even take any further. She's going to give us some tips on how to talk to owners of, and therefore the sellers of development sites. She's going to give us some of those tragic stories that we all want to hear of what's done, what's worked and what hasn't worked. She's got stories in aplenty. So sit back and enjoy, because tonight you're going to learn from Rachael, and if you're interested in development sites, this is a must-see. So for the next 30 minutes, grab a notepad and a drink and enjoy the information from Rachael Hambling, Development Site Acquisition Specialist. This is Scotty from Xenium Real Wealth. Talk to you soon. All right, the first webinar of every month, we have a special guest, and tonight's special guest is Rachael Hambling. Hi, Rachael.
Hey, Scotty.
So Rachael, her special talent in life is finding development sites. In fact, she's that good, she calls herself a site acquisition specialist. That's a big mouthful, Rachael. So with that in mind, let's have a chat to Rachael tonight on how she got started, how to find good sites, what tools she uses, and then run through some her tricks of the trade. So Rachael, how did you get started in finding development sites?
Well, it's probably, be about 7 years now, Scott. And I got interested in property development and how to build wealth with property. And I just started to have a look around and find opportunities. And yeah, it just sort of built from there. And we started getting some small sites where we would do some joint ventures and put DAs, and then we'd flick them and pass them on to other developers. And yeah, so that was sort of the starting point of finding development sites.
Okay. And so it was a bit of a passion for you. I mean, it wasn't just something that you went, oh, I stumbled across. Like, it was something that had you done other property things before?
I'd done some basic stuff, but I'd always had a real passion around property development and investing in property. I knew it was a great way to build wealth, but I didn't really know much about it. So I started off doing Robert Kiyosaki, and obviously reading his books and doing his programs online and different things like that. And that sort of got me started. And then I would just sort of reached out to different groups and other developers and different mentors and sort of went from there.
Okay. All right. So was it easy to break into? How did you find your first site?
Oh, well, a lot of, I won't say a lot of hard work, but just a lot of consistent work. So we'd sort of focused on a particular area that we wanted to target. And I always say that as a good way to start when you're doing property development or looking for really good sites is find a couple of areas that you're really interested in and focus on those areas. So become a site or an area expert, they call it. So, know the agents in that area, look for opportunities, drive around the streets. We used to put letters in letterboxes, and actually that was my first site. We actually, that site was in Bulimba.
Yeah.
And we sent a letter to the owner, and we'd identified that it was a good development site there was a few reasons behind that. And we got a call back from the owner and went and had a meeting, and that's where it went from there.
Okay. So you're really looking, that's off market. I mean, that wasn't at all listed, right?
No, that's right. So I'd obviously just by talking to some mentors and other developers and different people who'd been in the property industry and just the way they were doing it, finding stuff that was off market was an advantage because you could deal directly with the vendor, or you didn't have the competition if it was through an agent. And that way we could it was just a bit of an advantage, I suppose, and allowed you to be able to create an opportunity with a good price and good terms that suited the vendor.
Okay. So what do you look for when you look for sites? Like, I mean, you said that you identified that one was a good development site. How did that happen?
So I think at the time we were looking for particular sizes of sites. So we were looking for anything over 810 square metres. It had to have a certain frontage, because in development, if you need to have a good frontage to be able to either shift a house or to do a townhouse development. We were looking for sites that didn't have flood overlay, sort of good infrastructure near, buses or trains or, local shopping centres, those sorts of things. And also sites that were already zoned, so zoned LMR, so we could do a townhouse or a unit development.
Right. Okay. And so how did you, like, when you said you're looking for that, I mean, were you just walking the streets, or did you use some other tools to find that information?
Yep, so I've always had access to Price Finder, and you can use RP data as well. And then what we would do is we would search for the particular size of site and in a particular suburb, and we'd print a list down and we'd go through those, and then we'd trail through PD Online checking zoning and overlays and different things like that. So when you're doing site finding, those sorts of tools are really important, because they cut a lot of your legwork out. And, instead of, trailing the streets is great, but you're always going to need those tools to be able to, I suppose it decreases the time that you spend on searching for the particular sites and knowing whether or not it's even worth looking at.
Okay. So that then leads me to my next question. What makes a good site versus a bad site versus a site that's not a site at all?
Yeah. So I would always look for, we'd always look for the basic things. And we always start off with the feasibility. Even though we haven't really looked into into overlays and restrictions and things like that, but we start with the numbers. And if the feasibility stacks, then you go to the next step. So I suppose a good site versus a bad site would be something that's code accessible. So if it's the right size and you know that you can get a certain amount of townhomes on there, and the frontage is good and there's no flooding and the site doesn't slope, where the utilities are, water, stormwater, sewer, all those sorts of things, then that would make a good site. If you didn't have access to sewer, or the frontage wasn't wide enough to do a townhouse development, but maybe long enough to do a townhouse development. So those are the sorts of things that I would look for to determine whether or not the site was a good site or not.
Okay. So that's, to me, sounds like a whole bunch of looking before you even get to letterbox dropping.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, can be. I think once you get quite familiar with your area, it does become a lot easier to trail through that, but that takes time and hours and effort and experience, and even for the simplicity of knowing how wide a driveway needs to be,
Yeah.
down the side of a character home, or what your setbacks need to be, or if it is in a character zone, how you actually have to have the buildings designed. So there's so many little sort of intricate details that and it's usually that sort of work is the tedious sort of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So you've located a good site with using your tools and looking at the overlays and that sort of thing. So is the next step what, door knocking, letterbox dropping, or do you approach an agent? Like, what do you do?
Well, you could do it a couple of ways. Definitely, if you feel confident enough to door knock, I'd say go and knock on the doors. If you know through RP data or price finder that the owner lives at home, then I'd be knocking on the door. If it's a rental property, then I'd be sending them a letter, and asking them if they're open to discussing a sale. If you didn't have any luck there, I'd approach either a site finder or an agent and get them to go and contact the owner or knock on their door.
Yeah. Okay. So you make contact with the owner, and in that first example, you use your first site at was it Brisbane somewhere? You said
Bulimba.
Bulimba, yeah. So and you'd letterbox drop for that, and you got a call. So
yes.
then what? You say, hey, I want to buy your house.
Yeah, so we just talked to them about what their needs were. So why were they selling? And it was two sisters, and their parents had passed away, and that house was left to them in an estate. So they wanted to sell it. They knew it had development potential. They'd sort of been with an agent before, but wasn't really happy with how they'd marketed it. So we'd talk to them about the fact that we knew developers. So we went and sat down with them, had a meeting, cup of coffee, and built a relationship with them. And that's how we ended up getting a contract on the site.
Okay, that's cool. Yep, all right. So you would find a lot of sites, and you'd send a lot of letters or door knock, whatever, and you'd get a lot of no's, I'm assuming, like, oh, go away, not interested in this sort of mumbo jumbo. About how many sites would you look through? I'm not talking about online, I'm talking about at that sort of targeted spot before you got one that was even willing to talk to you, then versus one that was actually a decent saleable item at the end.
Yeah. So for our statistics, it was normally 100 letters, and we would maybe get 10 phone calls.
Yeah.
Very rarely would I get someone saying no, bugger off. Some of them were just a bit curious and wanted to know more about it, which I'd be very willing to just have a chat to them. It was always good practice when you get cold calls from people you don't know.
Yeah.
But probably maybe 3 to 5 of those would be serious sellers. But the process of elimination there was around their price, their terms, and whether or not the site really could be developed.
So out of that 100, you get 3 to 5, and then out of that, you get what, 1, 2?
At least, yeah, 1. I'd say 1 that we would be able to put under option or contract, and then pass it on to a developer.
Okay, so from 100 down to 1. All right, that's good. So then the next stage, which you just touched on, is contracting that site. So if you're still not sure of exactly what can be done, but you want to tie it up, or now that seller is obviously fairly educated, going, oh, well, could be development now because you've had that discussion. How do you tie it up so that they don't just go to the agent or do it themselves, or whatever it is?
Yeah, well, you can do, there's a couple of things you could do. You could do a heads of agreement. You could do an option agreement. You could sign it up with a contract with a rescission clause, and make sure you enter into that in the due diligence time so you don't get double stamp duty. There's a few solicitors that are probably 50-50 on that clause, but we and I think too, like, building a relationship with the owner is really important. So it's not just about putting the site under contract, it's making them feel comfortable in what you're doing and your confidence level and where you're headed, and communicating with them. If you don't communicate with them, they don't know what you're doing. But I'd always make sure every couple of days I'd be in touch with them, let them know what was happening, where we were up to. And we would normally bring in a developer at that stage. So they would end up being the person who would contract the site.
Okay. All right. So you tie it all up, and then because you weren't developing it, you'd have 1 or 2 or whatever developers and get the right one, and then they have the contract with the site.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So has there been any disaster stories?
Oh, disaster stories.
Or are you just like that good?
Oh, goodness. I'm just trying to think.
Well, I'm sort of thinking not so much to the development, because you don't do the development. That's a different sort of thing. We're talking about the finding. So what about a site that you had, that was really good, that was great, and then the seller changed their mind, or like, is there
Oh
anything?
that happens often. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think probably that. I mean, well, I think the hard or the most challenging is that when you understand their needs and how they're motivated, you find the right buyer for the site, so the ultimate buyer, and you know what price they want and what terms they want, and then you get your developer and they come in at that, so exactly what they want, and then the owner changes their mind, or they get frightened, or someone gets in their ear and says, oh, it's worth more than that. So that happens sometimes, and that can be a bit frustrating.
Right. And is it more likely at that point, is it more likely that people are unsure and get frightened, or is it more likely that they get greedy? Which one?
Oh, if I was put a percentage, I'd say greedy.
Yeah.
So, but I think too that also is where, as a finder, you've got to have evidence to back up
Yeah.
the price that they're wanting, or so be able to show them that that or less is what people are buying those types of sites for. So I suppose it's more around making sure that they understand that the offer that they're being made is a realistic one around the market price.
Yep. Yep. No, that's fair. All right. So obviously you've been doing this for quite a number of years now, and and I know this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. It's not just you anymore, is it? So,
No.
you spread your wings fairly far and wide. I mean, what states do you cover? How many people do you have kind of, I mean, I know they're not all working for you, but in your network, how big
Yeah.
is it?
Well, yes, 7 years, Scott. It's a long time. Yeah, so basically we have a multitude of finders that are bringing us sites every week. We're constantly in touch with a list of agents that we have on our books. They know we only look at off-market sites, so they never bring me anything other than that. I mean, just a tip too for everybody: be in, like, if you are working with agents, be in their face. When they get an off-market site across their desk, you want to be the first person they think about.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I get a lot of my development sites from that are off-market, because the agents know that I've got developers that are looking for sites, and that I'll act relatively quickly. So
Yeah.
we're based in Brisbane. We do Brisbane, Sydney, although it's a bit challenging at the moment, but we still do Sydney, Melbourne. We've just moved into Adelaide, so that's in our residential division, and
Yeah.
our commercial division is Australia-wide, and that's our bigger sites like childcare and office and hotels. And I've
Okay.
got
So
two business
that's
development managers that work for me now, and a full-time virtual assistant. So yeah, it's grown pretty fast over that
yeah.
time, I suppose.
No,
Yeah.
that's good. Well, so we touched earlier on one of the first things, and when I look down, I'm actually taking lots of notes here. Is you got your tools, but you said you start with the FISO. So have you got any example of a FISO or something that we could have a look at, and how
Yeah.
you do things? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go through. I've got one that works well and one that doesn't. So
All right.
we'll.
Good.
I think I've got to go into my sharing options here and look at the materials. Just give me a sec. So, okay. Can you see that, Scott?
Yeah. All good.
Awesome. All right. I've just got to bring that screen down, and I'm going to need to put my glasses on if that's okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so this is a site that we did. It's a land subdivision out at Logan Reserve in Bays Road. You probably remember this one, Scott.
I see a
So
lot
the
of
owners,
sites.
huh?
I see a lot of sites. I don't know if I remember it.
So this was a really good little land subdivision. We were going to get about 82, it says up there in the corner, lots from this site. The house on it was very old, and so we could pretty much just demolish that. So the owner wanted $3 million, as you can see. So we put that in, and the FISO calculates your stamp duty. And then we always look at the end sale price. So you can see there that establishing 82 lots between 400 and 600 square metres, then we were able to get I think they were around about 210 at the time. This was actually a pretty cool site because we already had a buyer for the lots that after they'd been developed. So it was almost sort of 82 pre-sales really.
Wow.
So in the development costs, we try and allow for everything that we know is going to cost us, up front. Obviously, there's always contingencies and things you don't know about, but there's legals, there's, professional fees for your DA and your BA, application fee for your approvals, demolition and clearing the site, project management fees, all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that's included in your development cost area. And for us, when we run our feasibilities, it's just to find out whether or not the site works, to see whether or not we're going to spend any more time moving forward.
Because everyone does their FISOs different, right? So this is just so you think that the site is okay to take to your developers. Is that right?
Yeah, it's just a benchmark. Everybody, all my developers run their own numbers.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we can see down there it's about a $10 million development cost, including interest, and there's a little over 400,000 for contingency.
Yeah.
And then I've got the sheet here because that's not come up properly on the page there, but it just basically calculates the total cost of the development plus the land purchase price. So your total costs about $4 million altogether, which you can see there on the screen.
Yeah.
We also allow for GST. You can't see that, but it is in the feasibility. And then the net profit return is 23%.
Okay.
So with the pre-sales in place, that was a pretty good risk-adverse site for that developer.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that was a good one, that one. And I think the developer is the DA's already out on that one, so he's probably in the process of doing the civils as we speak. Okay. So just conscious of time, I'll move on to this next one. So this one is out at Park Ridge, and this is a recent one. I'll just close that down. So this is a site that on face value looked like a really good development site. Great size, good frontage, flat block, not too many trees. Just the obvious things by looking at it looked like, this is a really good site.
Okay.
But at closer look, even after we did the numbers, I'll go through some of those things, but basically the owners, that 850 was actually not the price that they wanted. They wanted a little higher than that. We were going to keep the existing house because it was in a good position and then add on 10 extra blocks. But as you can see, by the time you scroll down from the resale price of that product and the cost to develop it, if you go to the next screen, it's only a 4% return. So in running those numbers, I knew straight away that there's really nowhere to crawl back from there. Even if you probably bought the site for 150,000, it still wouldn't be worth developing. So and in closer look, just even on the site there, the site was covered in biodiversity and flood overlay. So a bit of a challenging one, but it just shows how a feasibility is such an important tool, like really, really important, and to be able to understand those numbers, how they work, in knowing, whether or not it's worth spending any time in investigating that site.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. All right, so when you see something like that and it comes in at 4%, it just falls off your table and you go to the next one?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you see whether, or you try and see whether or not you can do any more investigating. But yeah, like I said, if it was maybe 18% return, I would, I'd maybe check my numbers and really go back and have a look at the resale prices of the end product to see if I'm, not being way too conservative.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this one was just way too low. And then checking the overlays as a second look, it was completely not a good site, unfortunately.
So you talk about 18%. That's a figure that that's obviously we use as well behind the scenes. But 18% is the cutoff for banks that look at funding. Is that that's what you?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
20%. I would say 20%,
Yeah.
and or some. I mean, for splitter blocks and sites where you're really in and out of the market in 3 months, 18% would probably be okay.
Yeah.
But we try and find land subdivisions and townhouse sites for about 25% return on
Yeah.
investment. Just
Okay.
because if there's a contingency and something goes wrong, you've got a buffer there.
For sure. For sure. And do you find many small sites like the splitter blocks and stuff like that? Is that something that you still come across?
Yeah, definitely. We usually get a couple of splitter blocks every week, but
Yeah.
just to make them work, unfortunately. Because
Yeah.
property owners have become so savvy in this market that the pricing is a bit.
Savvy, greedy, who knows what they become. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. And so, okay, well, that's really good. Thank you for going through those FISOs. And look, as you mentioned, everyone does a FISO differently. We've got about two or three different ones in our office, so that's fine. It's because it's a bit of a reflection of how you think about things too. So it's not
Yeah,
necessarily a right or wrong way, unless of course it's wrong if you don't put all the costs in, then it's just
yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
But
And the numbers never
don't.
lie, Scott.
Yeah, that's right. You don't get caught up on this on how it's set out is what I'm trying to get across to
Yeah.
everyone. Now, look, we've got a couple of questions here, Rachel. So, what are overlays? You referred a couple of times to overlays.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean?
So an overlay is a restriction on the site that's been imposed by council. So we talk about flooding overlay. So in Brisbane City Council, there are 3 different levels of flooding overlay. There's Brisbane River, creek flooding, and overland flow. So one of your tools that you would use when you're looking at the sites is PD Online, the interactive mapping. So if you're in Brisbane City Council and you're looking for a site, there you'd be able to jump online and you'd be able to check the flood overlay.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's what an overlay is. It's a restriction on the site that needs to be addressed in the development approval process.
So there's flood and there's I guess what trees and road noise like is how many is there?
Oh,
Heaps.
yeah. There's quite a few. I know with Brisbane City Council and actually Moreton Bay, if you look up the site, they actually online they'll actually give you a list of the overlays that are affected on the site. So you don't have to go trail through every one to be able to assess whether or not they've got any overlays that you need to address.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I
Okay.
think Jace has just asked me a question about the tools, whether there's any free tools. So the tool that I use that costs money is PD Online. And the free tools I would use are things like, we all use Google. Even realestate.com. There's obviously the council websites are really great, and all of that information is free. There's a couple of others that I'm thinking of, but I can't remember the names. But I'd be happy to provide those if you like, and
Yeah, we can do. We got notes. I've got notes here. I'll send out with them.
yeah.
That's fine.
One called Cityscape, I think, which is really good too, and you can look up development applications or different things like that. So I'll have a look at some of the other ones I've gotten and let you know.
I reckon neighbours are a good free tool.
They're always a good.
You get a lot of. You go and talk to around the site that you want to do, and you talk to them, and you get a lot of info.
Yeah. Oh, that's a brilliant way to do it. Just especially if you're allowed, the owner's giving you permission to turn up on site, you'd be surprised who's there watching or looking out windows and stuff. So, and we've sometimes knocked on the neighbour's door just to get a feel for, what their feeling is about development going on. Because it's always good to know if you're going to put a development application in, if you're going to get cranky neighbours.
Have you had tomatoes and stuff thrown at you?
No.
Oh, you've done well then. Yeah, and you talked about sites in Sydney, but you're not doing much in there now because of the current market for development. But that's Sydney's an area that you cover for searching.
Yeah, so at the moment we're focusing more on townhomes in Sydney, small unit developments, and then to the other extreme would be hotels. So we're finding that we can still get some of those sites to work if they're in good areas, close to facilities and good infrastructure, and so those prices are starting to come down for the buy-in, but they seem to still be stacking.
Yep. Okay, that's great. Well, there's any more questions? One more question here. We've got, in a previous webinar, we presented a small lot subdivision. Do you prefer small developments and why? Oh, that's asked to me. Okay. Well, we do small developments because we're not a big developer, and the small infill sites are, and Rachel can perhaps make some comments on this, is whilst they can be pricey per square metre or per lot, generally speaking, there's less of them, so you have a better ability to sell them out quickly compared to buying a 100 or a 200 lot subdivision. Is that your same take, Rachel?
Yeah, and I think too with the, especially if you're, within 10 kilometres or even 15 kilometres of your central CBD, I think that does reduce your risk when you go to sell at the end. And you're targeting more of an owner-occupier than you are an investor. So you're going to do a nicer product, you're going to market it well, and you're not selling off maybe trying to sell off 30 townhomes. You've got, maybe a home in the front that you might renovate and sell off, and then you might have two really beautiful, good sized townhomes in the back, and you'll have no problems on selling that.
Yeah. No, that's right. And we like the small ones for that reason. Between 8 and 15 lots is a good manageable size. Once we get above 20, 30 lots, it's the same thing but more, but it's the exit strategy that we're not particularly a fan of, being held with a whole bunch of lots for a long period of time. Yeah, but that doesn't mean there's not people out there that do that. I mean, there's plenty of people. In fact, I met a guy today who ironically turned up at my door. He used to live in our house like in the 60s, and he just was driving past and says, I have to check it out. He's got 8,000 lots in southeast Queensland in one estate. That's massive. So that's a lot of land. He's got a few years worth of sales there, I'd reckon.
Can you divide it up, Scott, and send a few my way?
Yeah, I don't know. I barely got his details. He's going to email me. But yeah, interesting. Talk about a coincidence.
Yeah, wow. That's the other extreme. Yeah. But with the smaller, with those size land subdivisions too, you're in and out of the market relatively quickly. Yeah. So you can, gauge your risk, and especially in the Brisbane market where it's sort of fairly consistent. So I think that's a really good strategy. Yeah.
No, I agree. That's over there. All right. Well, look, Rachel, thank you very much for your time tonight. I mean, I've taken, a good number of notes, and I'll put them out, and with some of those top tips that you mentioned there and some of those other those sites and things that free tools that you use. We'll add them into the notes when we send this out. Thank you very much for joining us. I've found it very interesting, and I can see from our viewers there, the comments that have come through, they found it interesting too.
Thanks.
Look, Rachel, we've used Rachel for many years, and as I said, she's found more sites than anybody else I know. So, Rachel, thanks for doing that, and thanks for joining us this evening, and we all learned heaps.
Thanks,
all right,
everyone.
that's it from us at Xenium Real Wealth. Hope you got a lot out of this, and until next time, be good.